Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1947, Roswell, Secret of the Third Site. Young Dee Proctor and the Hidden Bluff. When people talk about the geography of the Roswell incident, they usually focus on a binary narrative. The massive, sprawling debris field on Mac Brazel's Foster Ranch, Project Mogul, versus the legendary second site out on the plains of San Agustin, where the intact craft and bodies were supposedly found. However, veteran ufological researchers Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt, authors of Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell, unearthed a missing geographic and psychological link that complicates the map even further. It is a location now referred to by researchers as the Dee Proctor Site or the Third Crash Locus. The entire narrative hinges on a 7-year-old local boy, a quarter a day, and a secret kept for nearly half a century. When history textbooks chronicle the defining, paradigm-shifting moments of the 20th century, they rarely feature 7-year-old boys earning pocket change from the back of a horse. Yet, out in the sprawling, sunburned, and utterly desolate expanses of Lincoln County, New Mexico, during the scorching summer of 1947, young Timothy William Dee Proctor was quietly riding straight into the dead center of the most famous cosmic enigma in modern history. If you want to understand how the Roswell incident managed to fracture into a tangled web of hidden, localized pieces, you have to look closely at the unlikely partnership between a seasoned ranch foreman and a kid whose daily wages wouldn't even buy you a lukewarm soda today. Back in July 1947, the remote stretch of desert-hugging Corona and Roswell was a tight-knit, isolated frontier community where neighbors relied on grit, luck, and each other just to survive the punishing landscape. Dee Proctor was the son of Floyd and Loretta Proctor, local ranchers whose property sat right along the border of the Foster Ranch. With school dismissed for the scorching summer months, 7-year-old Dee was living out a rustic, dust-choked adventure. He wasn't sitting indoors staring at a television screen or playing organized sports. He was putting in an honest day's labor. Employed by ranch foreman William Mac Brazel, Dee was paid a grand total of 25 cents a day to climb into the saddle, help manage the sheep herds, and navigate the treacherous, cactus-choked arroyos of the New Mexico range. At just 7 years old, Dee already knew the land, the unpredictable desert weather, and the livestock better than most adults twice his age. He was intimately familiar with the rhythmic, solitary grind of herding sheep under a brutal southwestern sun, but absolutely nothing in his young life could have prepared him for what was waiting in the desert dust that July. Popular UFO mythology has long cast Mac Brazel as a solitary cowboy wandering the Foster Ranch all by his lonesome, pondering the mysteries of the universe when he suddenly stumbled upon a pile of unearthly wreckage. But historical investigations and first-hand witness accounts, compiled by researchers like Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt, reveal a much more intimate and crowded reality. Brazel was not alone. Little Dee Proctor was right there beside him in the saddle. On the night of that infamous, violently aggressive nocturnal thunderstorm that ripped across Lincoln and Chavez counties, the exact atmospheric temper tantrum that birthed the entire Roswell legend, both Brazel and young Dee heard the sky literally tear open. It wasn't the rolling, predictable crackle of standard desert thunder. It was a massive, bone-rattling, concussive explosion that shook the ground beneath their horses and echoed ominously across the dark landscape. The next morning, as the sun broke over the drenched, shimmering sagebrush, Brazel and 7-year-old Dee rode out to check on the range. And there, stretching across the open pasture, they didn't just find scattered sheep or broken cedar branches. They stumbled directly into the heart of an impossible, glittering wreckage field composed of indestructible foil, strange amber-colored tape, and unburnable structural members. Just like that, a small 7-year-old boy from a forgotten New Mexico backroad had accidentally become one of the very first human beings on planet Earth to lay eyes on the physical aftermath of the Roswell incident. While the rest of the world spent decades treating the Roswell incident as a cultural punchline, a political distraction, or a foundational sci-fi myth, 7-year-old Dee Proctor experienced it as an active, deeply unsettling psychological fracture. If the primary Foster Ranch debris field was a chaotic spectacle of tinfoil and structural struts that made newspaper headlines on July 8, 1947, The secret young Dee carried out of that desert was something altogether darker, heavier, and entirely unprintable. In a tight-knit rural outpost like Corona or Roswell, secrets usually have a shelf life of about 20 minutes. Children are notoriously incapable of keeping high-stakes confidences, especially if they happen to witness something as paradigm-shattering as a crashed flying machine or its surreal aftermath. If local kids found a mangled military spy balloon or weird wreckage, it typically became elite playground currency by lunchtime. Yet, Dee Proctor did the exact opposite. He locked the memory away behind a wall of absolute unyielding iron. For nearly 50 years, Dee maintained an almost pathological refusal to speak about the summer of 1947. He didn't brag about it to his classmates, he didn't whisper about it to his teenage sweethearts, and he didn't run home to confess it to his parents with wide-eyed, innocent wonder. The trauma of that morning on the range had completely bypassed normal youthful excitement and struck straight into the core of his psyche. The event acted like a silent, anchor-like weight, dragging down his childhood memories and locking a vital piece of his life away in a vault. Why would a 7-year-old boy exhibit such profound, monk-like discretion? Researchers examining witness psychology in high strangeness cases point to a few compelling, heavy-duty factors. Even if young Dee didn't fully grasp the complex geopolitical implications of Cold War atomic paranoia, children are walking emotional barometers. The immediate heavy-handed military lockdown of Lincoln County in July 1947, where ranch hands were interrogated, dark threats of treason hung in the air, and strange men in crisply pressed uniforms suddenly swarmed the landscape, created an environment of palpable terror. A kid learns very quickly that some things are simply too dangerous to chat about over breakfast. If Dee witnessed something truly anomalous up on that secondary bluff, whether it involved biological remains, grotesque structural wreckage, or aggressive military intimidation, the sheer cognitive dissonance would be entirely too much for a 7-year-old brain to process. Instead of healthy assimilation, the memory triggered instant, defensive psychological suppression. Decades rolled by. Dee grew up, built a regular life, watched the entire global culture obsess over UFO lore, read the best-selling books, watch the late-night documentaries, and listened to half a century of government denials and congressional inquiries. Through it all, he kept his teeth clenched and his mouth shut. While opportunistic hucksters cashed in on fabricated stories and exaggerated secondhand tales, the true, original eyewitness walked through life carrying an actual, unadulterated secret. The psychological cost of that silence manifested as a quiet, heavy burden, a constant, nagging awareness that he held a missing piece of a puzzle the rest of the planet was desperate to solve, tucked safely behind a personal vow he had made to himself out in the desert dust 50 years prior. For nearly 50 years, the wall of silence surrounding Timothy William Dee Proctor remained as impenetrable as a military bunker. While the global UFO community built an entire corporate mythology out of tinfoil, weather balloons, and frantic government cover-ups, the man who had actually ridden side by side with Mac Brazel on that fateful July morning in 1947 quietly kept his secrets locked in the vault. That silence finally cracked in 1994, when an older, weary Dee Proctor decided that before time ran out, the real unvarnished geography of that scorching summer needed to see the light of day. By 1994, the modern UFO community, spurred by relentless investigators like Stanton Friedman, Kevin Randall, and Thomas Carey, was aggressively re-examining the Roswell archives, tracking down aging witnesses and mapping every square inch of the Foster Ranch like cartographers hunting El Dorado for Dee Proctor. This renewed public circus wasn't an invitation to chase cheap fame or go on morning talk shows. It was a psychological breaking point. The sheer grinding weight of carrying a 5-decade-long secret had finally reached its structural limit. One afternoon in 1994, Dee turned the ignition on his truck, asked his mother, Loretta Proctor, to climb into the passenger seat and embarked on a tense, deliberate journey back into the scorching desert of his childhood. Let's be clear, this was not your average Sunday pleasure cruise. Dee navigated the landscape with the precise, haunted familiarity of a man retracing the footsteps of a ghost. As they bounced down the rickety, forgotten back roads bordering the Foster Ranch, Dee actively ignored the landmarks that had dominated the history books and tourist pamphlets for decades. He drove right past the turnoff points for the famous primary debris field windmill, where Mac Brazel had originally gathered up his arms full of scattered lightweight foil, rubber strips, and balsa-like wood. He blew past Hines Draw Road, giving a wide berth to the standard investigator paths and UFO hunter campgrounds. Instead, Dee was heading deeper into the rough tooth-and-nail terrain, steering his truck deliberately away from the well-trodden highways of conventional Roswell lore and proved toward an entirely different, lonelier destination. Eventually, Dee brought the truck to a grinding halt in front of an old, weathered, chain-secured ranch gate. After unlocking it, he coaxed the vehicle over faint, disused sheep trails that modern passenger cars wouldn't dare approach, winding his way toward an isolated, windswept plateau sitting roughly 2.5 miles southeast of the original Corona debris site. This was a forgotten, raw pocket of Lincoln County, a place where the desert wind howled unchecked and the rest of modern civilization felt a million miles away. He cut the engine, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the New Mexico desert swallow the cab whole. Turning to his mother, Loretta, Dee pointed a steady and wavering finger toward the desolate ridge rising above them and uttered the 5 words that permanently expanded the map of the Roswell incident. Here is where Mac found something else. For researchers, Dee Proctor's 1994 confession to his mother was nothing short of a seismic tectonic shift. It provided physical, localized validation for what investigators had long suspected in the dark. The Roswell incident was never confined to a single, tidy, wind-blown debris field. By pointing out this secondary, isolated bluff miles away from the primary windmill site, Dee corroborated the darkest whispers of a multi-site disaster. It acted as the missing mechanical link, connecting the lightweight structural trash found scattered across the open pasture to the heavier, far more terrifying rumors of a secondary impact zone where something entirely non-human had allegedly come to rest. The boy who had ridden the range for 25 cents a day had finally brought his life's journey full circle. He proved an enduring, poetic truth. The deepest secrets of human history are rarely found neatly filed away in government cabinets or classified briefing folders. Instead, they are locked inside the silent, enduring memories of the people who walked the land when the world changed forever. When ufological historians Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt integrated 7-year-old Dee Proctor's 1947 memories into the broader architecture of the Roswell legend, they weren't just sticking another pin into a dusty New Mexico map. They were trying to solve a glaring physical contradiction that had tortured researchers for decades. How on earth could a single, solitary object manage to produce both the flimsy, mundane radar reflector tinfoil found at the primary Foster Ranch windmill and the cinematic, blood-curdling tales of intact hulls and non-human entities circulating through underground military channels? The answer, researchers argue, sits quietly locked away on an isolated, windswept bluff 2.5 miles southeast of Corona, the exact spot an older Dee pointed to in 1994, 50 years after the dust had settled. If you want to understand what likely happened at the Dee Proctor site, you have to abandon the tidy Hollywood trope of a spaceship landing gracefully in a pasture and instead embrace the chaotic, high-speed violence of an atmospheric breakup. A high-altitude vehicle experiencing catastrophic structural failure doesn't just politely disassemble all at once. It goes through a brutal, sequential sequence. As the vessel clipped a ridge or suffered a catastrophic systems failure over the brutal Lincoln County plains, its outer hull fractured. This initial impact zone, the Dee Proctor Bluff, acted as the primary stress point where the craft violently shed its denser structural components and, theoretically, its sensitive internal payload. Once the hull was compromised, the lighter materials, the balsa-like wood, amber tape, and feather-light radar reflector foil, were gleefully snatched up by high-altitude desert winds and carried miles across the open pasture to become the famous debris field discovered by Mac Brazel. In short, the primary windmill site was merely the messy fallout carried on the breeze. The Dee Proctor Bluff was where the actual violent structural trauma took place. Naturally, things get significantly more dramatic when we look at the biological side of the ledger. According to secondary military intelligence accounts and decades of whispered witness corridors, this specific upland sector is suspected by researchers to be the precise location where the craft's occupants met their unfortunate end. Analysts suggest that if the vehicle suffered an explosive decompression or structural shear near the bluff, any biological entities or sensitive internal components would have been violently exposed, compromised, or blown clear of the main hull before the wreckage drifted or limped toward its final resting spot. Even more intriguing are persistent rumors from early ranch hand networks, suggesting that before the 509th Bombardment Group aggressively locked down the county, locals briefly stumbled upon something far more substantial than tinfoil at this exact plateau, perhaps a compact, box-like structural module or container that was hurriedly dragged and stashed inside a nearby ranch cattle shed before frantic military intelligence officers arrived to sanitize the grid. Adding the Dee Proctor Site to the map fundamentally alters how we understand the Roswell incident, lifting it out of the realm of a tidy, single-location urban legend and dropping it squarely into the category of a sprawling, multi-point disaster zone. Skeptics have spent decades leaning on the Project Mogul explanation, a string of experimental rubber balloons and kite targets, to dismiss Roswell as a boring administrative mix-up. But a cluster of weather balloons cannot account for a multi-mile spread involving independent high-altitude structural trauma zones and localized biological recovery rumors. The Dee Proctor Site serves as the missing mechanical gear that makes the entire legend fit together. The true history of July 1947 was never a neat cinematic event playing out under studio lights. It was a chaotic, multi-point catastrophe scattered indiscriminately across miles of unforgiving, cactus-choked New Mexico desert. It was an event witnessed only in terrifying, fractured pieces by bewildered cowboys, by a panicked military machine that spent the next 50 years tripping over its own contradictory cover stories, and most memorably, by a 7-year-old boy in a saddle earning 25 cents a day, quietly carrying a heavy cosmic secret that took half a century to finally set him free. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.